Let's get a little bit of reaction from Ryan Shorthouse, the founder and executive chair of Bright Blue, which is an independent think tank for liberal conservatism. Thanks for joining us, Ryan. This bill has been a long time in the making. What have you made of the last 24 hours, specifically this section of Tory rebels who've threatened, really, to disrail the entire project?
Yeah, well, the high mark of the rebellion was yesterday in the second reading when 60 MPs voted for some of the amendments to toughen up this emergency legislation. But in the third reading tonight, sources now say that a majority of those rebels will now back the government and therefore not undermine the government completely, because if the government was voted against at third reading, then that would be a de facto vote of no confidence in the Prime Minister. So obviously the rebels have decided that it doesn't warrant that, and they'd rather pass the legislation as is, which will happen tonight. So the Rwanda plan will be up and running. But, my view on this is that it's right to reduce the small boat crossings. And the Prime Minister has obviously made that one of his central pledges. And to some extent, the plans that he has, for example, the returns agreement with Albania, has led to a significant reduction in the numbers coming this year, over last year, relative to the year before. I don't think the Rwanda Asylum Plan is going to significantly deter a number of migrants that come irregularly. That's because it seems to be that only 100 or so per year will be accepted by Rwanda, that they have the capability to do that. As such, even Home Office report suggests that the Rwanda scheme won't be a big deterrent. So despite that, there's been huge political capital wasted on this Rwanda plan, which has made the Conservative government look very divided, has obviously angered the Rwanda government, and has, sent a signal to the rest of the world that we're willing, or look like it could be the case, that some MPs from the government party were willing to undermine international law. I don't think it's really worth it for really the impact of the policy. There are other things the government should do. Returns agreements with more countries. The Albanian one has been successful, and the Prime Minister should get credit to that. But other things like, for example, offshoring asylum claims. The Rwanda policy is not that. It's a deportation scheme. An offshoring scheme means that somebody who wants to come to the UK has their asylum claim processed offshore, and then it's determined whether they come into the UK. The Rwanda scheme is you get deported, and then you hear from the Rwandan government whether you get an asylum claim to go into Rwanda or not. UK is taken out of that equation. So that's something, offshoring, that they could look at, as well as return agreements. I don't think it's been worth all of the political capital wasted on this Rwanda legislation.
Yeah, there's been a lot of merry-go-rounds here, hasn't there? You said that the high watermark came yesterday with the Tory rebels, and even though we understand the legislation will be passed, the Robert Jenrick amendment from just about half an hour ago, there was still 61 Tory MPs voting essentially against the Prime Minister, meaning that there is still discomfort and disquiet within the Tory party. So even if this gets passed tonight, or when it gets passed, as some may be saying, there's still a lot of unease and division within the Tories.
There is. But what I want to say about those amendments is three things. Because I'm worried about those amendments. To be honest, I'm worried about the Rwanda legislation generally, because the Supreme Court some months ago ruled that Rwanda was unsafe, and there was a risk that asylum seekers who claimed asylum in Rwanda would be sent back to a dangerous country. So it was deemed as unsafe, and obviously the government has decided to essentially ignore the Supreme Court ruling and pass legislation itself saying that Rwanda is safe. So I have a problem with that. But what the rebels wanted to do was basically close down any opportunity for asylum seekers who are claiming in the UK to have any form of legal challenge to their deportation to Rwanda. Now, I have a problem with that for three reasons. The first is that it is definitely not compliant with international law. And at the end of the day, Parliament is sovereign because it has voted for us to be part of various international treaties and international legislation. And therefore, we have to comply with that. But Parliament has decided to enter those treaties. The second is, I think it's just arrogant to assume that we know that everybody who crosses the channel and who comes irregularly should be deported and they don't have a legitimate claim. Without looking at the evidence and having a thorough review, then I don't know how you can make that assumption. Sure, there are lots of economic migrants who don't have justifiable claims, but they should be processed and looked at rather than just a kind of blanket ban on all people crossing the channel and assuming that they don't have a case to answer for. We wouldn't know that without looking at the evidence and having a proper review. And the third reason why I'm against these amendments from the rebels that is actually not aligned with UK public attitudes. The Telegraph commissioned a poll by YouGov, which they say suggests that the UK public is for deporting all illegal migrants instantaneously. But actually, Bright Blue commissioned Opinion to do polling some months ago, which suggested actually slightly different UK public attitudes. And the thing about polling is it depends on the framing of the question. And actually what really came through there is that people do want irregular migrants to be deported, but only once their case has been heard and has been deemed unsuccessful by UK authorities. So they don't want, the most popular answer is not that they're deported instantaneously, but they're deported only once their claim has been determined by the UK public authorities not to be justifiable. So really, the UK believes in fair play and due process. Let's see the process through and then let's deport them if it's not right. So that's why I'm against the three amendments that the Tory rebels have been pushing. But obviously, it looks like tonight they will be unsuccessful anyway, and the majority of the Conservative Party don't agree with those rebels.
Yeah, finally, Ryan, the wider issue here, I'm just watching Yvette Cooper, the Shadow Home Secretary, speaking in the Commons right now. Maybe unsurprisingly, she said the Prime Minister is in office but not in power, highly critical, saying another day of Tory chaos. Is it not time for the Prime Minister to call a general election?
The vast majority of the UK public do seem to be tired of the Tories. That's very clear. The default is for the Prime Minister to have the election in November or December. That's 5 years since the December 2019 election. Obviously, it's in his gift to bring it forward. He's not going to do that because he still believes that he can win it. But really, the way he's going to win it is to convince people that the Tories have managed to turn things around, not just on migration, but to be honest, where they really need to show that they've turned things around is around private incomes and public services, that those things are significantly improving and that Labour would be a risk to that recovery. That's what the Prime Minister wants to show, and he needs as much time as possible to show that. Now, I'm not convinced that the public are going to be persuaded by that argument. And I think we have now reached the point that they're tired of the Tories and they're looking for change. Nonetheless, Rishi believes that he can still turn it around and will therefore wait for the longest possible opportunity to do so. And the final thing is, of course, he likes being Prime Minister. So he's obviously going to hang on for it as long as possible because he believes he's the right person for the job.
Ryan, great to talk to you. Thanks for joining us. That is Ryan Shorthouse, founder and the executive chair of Bright Blue.